You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch, and you are listening to Time for Hemp all around the world on BitChute, on Tumblr, on iHeartRadio, on iTunes, on Spotify, any place that sound is found. We are around on the internet, letting everybody know how important it is to take time for hemp. And don't forget that when you hear the word joint on the big broadcast, hit your pipes, your bongs, your vaporizers, and take time for hemp. And be sure to share with your friends and hit the like button if you get a chance. That's how we get to make more content like this for you. On the program today, we are talking about the wonders of this plant with some of our wonderful friends. A buddy of mine by the name of Byrne has written a groovy book about how this plant is fantastic and great to be used by the world for all kinds of creature comforts and medicinal purposes. Hello, Byrne. Let people know about your book.
Thank you, Casper. The book, For Country and Cannabis. Essentially, it's a history book. I wanted to introduce to the American public or anybody else who wanted to read it how this happened. How did we go from no medical cannabis to what we have today, which is about 40 states, the District of Columbia, and every territory of the United States uses cannabis medically. In the world, we have at least 30 countries that have cannabis in their pharmacopoeia. I thought that it was worthwhile writing this book before I died. I was asked to write it by many people who lived through the time with me, and basically said to me, Al, if you don't write this book, nobody else can. So I wrote it. To leave the history behind, I filled it as best I could with cannabis, therapeutic cannabis education, how to use it, why to use it. And like, for instance, Casper just said, light up your bong. See, now in my book, I say, don't use a bong. And I tell you why. So there's that. The other thing is I wanted the people that began this process to be remembered. And I put their names in this book on purpose. And I explain their position in the history of it all. So a lot of us know Jack Herr and Dennis Perone and good. They're great friends of mine. I'm glad that I was with them when we did what we did, but you don't know all the others, and I wanted you to remember them. So that's what the book is about. And the full country part is I did 24 years in the United States Navy of active duty, and cannabis intersected with those 24 years on many, many occasions in positive and negative ways. And I thought it would be interesting to sort of identify how the military felt about all this, from the troop up to the general. How did they work this out? And the answer to that is not very well. So anyway, with that's the book. But today we have a Canadian guest and therefore we have a Canadian joint host. Yes, I'm going to light up. A joint host from Canada, and we're going to let Al Graham do the introductions for our Canadian host.
And Al Graham, you also work jointly on a Pace Radio broadcasting, don't you?
Yes. I work on Pace Radio broadcasting, found at paceradio.net. I heard you say joint, so I had to have my puff.
And while you're having your smoke, I'll jump in there. As Al Byrne mentioned, he mentioned a lot of people in his book. If you go into our archives at timeforhemp.news, you will find all kinds of people who have been pioneering the hemp and cannabis movement that you can listen to and enjoy their interviews. And if you check out our blogs, you'll see that we're bringing some of them who have passed away back to life, like we recently have done with Michelle Rady, a joint friend of Al Graham and I, and she was also a joint friend of everybody in the cannabis movement. So I'll let Al Graham discuss Michelle Rady a little bit and then bring on our guest. Al?
Michelle Rainey, she was a Canadian advocate that many people loved and followed. Michelle spent a lot of time educating people about the benefits of cannabis. She suffered from Crohn's disease, just like I do. I got to see her speak at a TY Cannabis Awareness Forum in Toronto, and she was talking about basically the disease and what it put everybody through. And she was an inspiration for me to be able to stand up and speak about the problems and dealing with the disease as well.
Well, and she had a charming sense of humor, and she was
did.
She didn't let it get her down. Right up to her last breath, she was telling the whole world how important medical cannabis was.
Exactly. And I would suggest everybody do a search on YouTube for Michelle Rainey, and you will find all kinds of videos that she produced and created.
And I know that our joint guest today, there's that word joint again. Oh, I said it twice. Was also a friend of Michelle Rainey's. And again, Al Graham, I'll let you bring our international star on today.
Yes, today's guest, originally from England, but is a well-known Canadian cannabis advocate. He's well-known in the cannabis community, knows Michelle very well. He's also a fellow who has been helping patients for as long as I've known him. So I'm going to say a couple decades. He's been helping patients, and a lot of people know him because of the court case that he was involved in, and the challenge that involved. It made so much effect to our situation here in Canada and for patients. And we're going to hear about it today. Instead of me talking about it, I'd like to welcome Owen Smith to the broadcast. Good day, Owen. You're muted, Owen.
Classic. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. There we go. I'll get you all moved around, get everybody in position. And I guess to get started, Owen, welcome to the show. Time for Hemp.
Thanks. You mentioned that I'm from England, but more specifically, I'm from a place called Hampshire. And Hampshire is like two words, Hamp, which is the German root for hemp, and Shire, which means official care or charge. So the place where I grew up used to be a big hemp growing area where they would provide hemp for sails and ropes for the British Navy. So
wow.
That's where I'm from. So I'm sort of
nice
from the Shire.
Wow. And I
journey.
Back then, at where you were living back then, I don't know how, obviously you're younger, but as far as like, hearing any stories, like all these hemp farmers, was there any big concern about, the sky was going to fall?
Well, this is historical.
Oh, okay.
There isn't any hemp growing there now. Not where I'm particularly from, but there was other sorts of farms had moved in. But you could still go down to the dockyard where they have the historical ships, like the HMS Victory, which took on the Spanish Armada back in like the 14th century. And the ropes, rigging, sails there are hemp. So
Nice.
the great value.
Yeah, that dovetails really well with our national ship, the USS Constitution, the oldest, longest commissioned ship in the Navy. And it too has ropes and sails and every other thing you can imagine made out of hemp. It was, in fact, we know now that it was Thomas Jefferson that smuggled a bunch of seeds in from England and from France into the United States in his diplomatic pouches because you guys had the good stuff. And Jefferson stole it. I mean, right out. That's what he did. But that's how important hemp was. So yeah, it's nice you bring that up. So give me the hemp shear again, because we have a new hemp shear over here.
Yeah.
Is that, you think that's the same meaning?
Yeah, I do understand that many of the names were copied in the United States. And the root of it is that Hanf, German, hemp, and shire, Old English, for a division of land. And the shire reeve was the sheriff. So he kind of made sure everyone's paying the taxes and stuff. Yeah.
Well, so we had a bunch of English guys that were hemp farmers that started up New Hampshire. That's curious. Yeah.
Yeah. The historical importance of hemp is certainly not to be missed. And going back further in my family history, I went to Ireland a few years ago, and I was digging around in the south of Ireland in County Cork, all antique shops, and I found a book. In the back of the book, it talked about hemp and the taxes that were being levied on Irish farmers for hemp by the English. So there was a book called Cannabiculture in Ireland back in the 17th century. They said, we can become independent with hemp. We don't need to rely on the British and the imports they're bringing us. We can grow our own hemp and sell it to Europe. Well, the British didn't like that, and they put an embargo on Ireland with their navy. So you couldn't get any of our hemp or hemp wool composites to Europe for sale. And they put big taxes on any of the hemp exports that we could do. So historically, yeah, many times I think hemp has been an important political piece of the
I admit that I had no idea that Ireland was in that was such a hemp interested country.
The British, I think this has some parallels in American history too, but the British were enforcing you had to grow hemp. It was part of the taxes. They were afraid of Napoleon coming. So they set up this program to grow hemp over a huge part of the best land in Ireland. And there was a lot of opposition to it because in Ireland, they traditionally dig the peat for fire and for building homes and stuff like this. So, yeah, there's a lot of history there.
Yeah, well, it does mirror United States, Virginia, Kentucky, all those sort of southeastern states, which is what the United States was back in that day, farmers were required to grow hemp. They had to. A certain part of their product had to be hemp. Very important, very important. So in Canada, you come into Canada as a UK citizen. I guess you became a Canadian citizen, I'm assuming, and then all of a sudden you woke up one day and said, well, now that I'm in this place, I'm gonna change it. Is that what happened?
Well, it was good timing in a way. Just the year after I arrived, I mean, I was only 11 years old, but 1996, Ted Smith started the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club. And in Vancouver, the first Compassion Club of Vancouver was born. So I arrived just as cannabis advocacy in a very public sense had arrived on the scene. And I didn't catch up for a few more years. But after high school, I found Ted Smith. and Ted ran the Victoria Compassion Club, and had for about 5 years at that point. And he was doing meetings at the University of Victoria. So what he would do is set up his microphone in the center of the field out front of the library, very central location, and students would circle up around him, and he had volunteers who would go around and hand out joints. So like at the Compassion Club all week, they'd smoke, and then they would keep the roaches, and then they'd roll the roaches into these joints and bring them to the meetings. And so, like, when I first went, it was like, oh, what? You can go somewhere and get free weed? Like, that sounds great. I must be like 19 or something. Go to the university, stand in the sunshine with all these beautiful young people, get free weed, listen to this guy talk about politics of cannabis, medical cannabis, really blowing all our minds, because none of us had heard how extreme it was. You know, endocannabinoid system. What do you mean? I produce weed in my brain? What? So there was so much to learn, and I think that's the case with this, given that it's been so demonized and trodden down, that when you do come to it, there's so much to learn. It can be a bit of a in your face, but it was through that. It was called Hempology 101. He did a lecture series at the university, and we did these weekly meetings.
What time was this meeting?
4:20.
I just thought I'd check.
I became the student club president and sort of like helped them with a couple of conventions. We had some key speakers come in. One of them was from Leitch. So we had a local law enforcement come and speak for us, which was nice. And also people like Mark Emery, Michelle Rainey, who was mentioned, and other activists at that time. And there has been many for those conventions. Yeah.
So it sounds like you were quite a handful for your parents. I mean, they bring you out of England into this wonderful cultured country called Canada, where you can get a refined education and grow up polished. And instead, you're running around the country, handing out free joints, talking about legalizing marijuana for cannabis.
They didn't have.
Are they ready for that?
It was hard for them to see this for me. And of course, I tried to explain it. You know, I'll try to tell you all these wonderful things, but they weren't buying it. And I think even to this day, a lot of it seems alien to them, because they're not cannabis consumers, my parents. And coming from England, you just don't have the exposure to any of the culture or any of the information. It's really just what you get from TV, news, really all of the stuff that's painted darkly across cannabis. And so it's been a struggle, actually, helping my parents understand my path with cannabis.
You might try introducing your parents to a group called, let's see, Paul McCartney's first boy band, the Beatles.
So you met Ted through the Hempology and all that. How did you end up, getting together and start, baking and being involved in VCBC?
Well, I mean, you bake food with cannabis. You do that?
Oh yeah. Oh
wow.
Yeah. I just learned how to do gluten-free baking, so now I can help out more people. But I was at the time just a student, and I've asked to be their baker, but they had one. So I left Victoria and traveled around, went to all of the BC hotspots like Nelson, where you have the Holy Smoke, which was one of the earliest places you could go and buy weed, smoke it in the store. I even had chocolate mushrooms. This is in the mountains of BC. And then I went up to Sunshine Coast, which is another hotspot, learned how to grow weed from the locals there, trim weed, all that sort of stuff. And then I came back to Victoria, and they had a job for me waiting. So I became the baker. And this was about 2008, 2007 at this point. I learned.
So the West Coast was cannabis orientated. Ontario, Quebec, etc. Nova Scotia, not so much.
That's right. we used to ship weed out there a lot. It was we would produce it here on the coast. You've got like an archipelago, lots of little islands, and people growing weed. Some of the islands you don't have any cars on them. There's no police. There's just people growing weed, and so yeah, we became renowned for that. Of course, we have the mountains too, so people are out in the mountains growing weed. I certainly grew a couple
longer season, better season, longer season to grow.
That's right, coastal, temperate climate. Yeah, we have some of our own land races here, like the Texay, the Time Warp, and that sort of thing.
Well, I'm confused now. You've got little islands that don't have cars. How do they get to the McDonald's? How do they get to the 7-Eleven? How do they get to the Pizza Hut?
Yeah, none of that.
They swim. How else could you do it?
They walk through the woods.
Yeah, they walk through the woods in their snowshoes. They get into their rubber suit. They swim through the Arctic Ocean. They get over to the 7-Eleven, and they repeat the process going back.
I figured they'd have a 7-Eleven on the island. I mean, I cannot imagine being someplace where there's no cars and no McDonald's and no 7-Eleven.
No Oreos. No Oreos.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, no. I'm coming, Wheezy. I'm coming. It's the big one. No Oreos. I'm coming.
Well, you can get these things on these islands. They usually have like a little shop, you know, they import them, but it costs like twice as much as you would anywhere else. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I can see that for sure because of just the shipping alone. So you've met Ted. They've asked you to be your baker, and so right from there, you've been helping patients along, and then one day, there was the door.
I was also a DJ when I was a baker at this time in my like late 20s. So I would make DJ mixes and listen to them while I baked. And so this is like DJ, like dance music. So it's like boom, boom, boom. And yeah, I probably had it a bit loud. So I got a sound complaint from the neighbors. And also it was a December morning and the filter and the air scrubber was broken and I was out of incense. And so the smell had reached the other doorways too. We had, the police were called on me. And I come to the door and they're like, you got to let us in. I'm like, it's not my apartment, but they're like, you have to let us in, which is kind of like a trick, tap and wrap sort of strategy to say like, they don't have a right to come in unless I let them in, right? So you be careful for police language like that. But at the time, I realized like, this has to happen. There's no reason to hide. Part of Ted's philosophy is always transparency, doing things as public as possible, really putting it in the face of the police or the community so that they can respond. So we're not isolated. And so, I let him in. What the lead police officer, East Indian man, he had recently been to India. And his family in India, they have been making cannabis pakoras for longest times. Grandma makes the best cannabis pakoras. He'd come to our store to tell us this like a few months before this guy comes in to bust me. So we kind of had a funny feeling about it. They were asking me questions. If I ate these cookies, what would happen to me? Would I feel funny? Would I feel silly? Would I, what would happen to me? And I'm like, hey, look, those aren't for you. They're not yours. Those are intended for medical patients. If you take those, people will be in pain tonight. They will be seizing. They will have seizures. There are people who have cancer. There are people who need this. So I saw it as an opportunity to really speak to the conscience of these human beings, to try to make them feel what they were doing had consequences. And it felt good to do that. It's good to tell them like, hey, look, you guys, you're wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. But like, what can I do to stop you? Nothing, right? So yeah, they call in another police officer, and the next head pokes inside the door is David Bratzer, and he is the LEAP member who spoke at our convention. And if you look up on the wall here, there's a poster of the convention that I made with his name on. So I'm like, already like 2 of the 3 police officers are like cannabis familiar or friends. So that was how it started. So more police came. They started asking me more questions, and it's just like, I can't answer all these questions for you. I'm good. They take me downtown to the interrogation room, sit me in the interrogation room, start sending in pairs of police officers to ask me questions. Some of them the same questions, but in different orders. They were trying to find out if I was really who I said I was. And this is because I had lost my wallet a few months before, and I didn't have any ID. I said I was a DJ. Well, I used to go raving in these mountains, to go for all-night dance parties, psychedelics, stars in the woods, trance music, that sort of thing. Well, I lost my wallet out in the woods, and so they didn't know who I was. And so I was like, they're asking these questions, and it was kind of funny, but also they thought that I was on the run, that I had done some other crimes, and I was concealing my identity. And so it's like hours and hours had passed. And then this fellow walks past the cell and looks in, and I recognize his face. An old friend of mine from high school, and also the goalkeeper of the soccer team that me and my friends put together called the Blazers, which was a soccer team where everybody smoked weed. And we smoked weed in the change rooms. We smoked weed on the field at halftime. We were really good. We finished top of the league 3 years in a row. We were way above what people would expect. And it was because the weed brought us together. Everybody's come to practice because you're going to smoke weed at the practice. It's here with your boys. It's not like drills and stuff. So it was a good team. He comes in. He's like, I don't expect to see you in here. And I'm like, me either. And, he verifies my identity to the other police officers, and that really helped it out. So I got to leave the police station at midnight, and it was December, so it was like icy cold. And I go back to the club, the Compassion Club, and there's Ted Smith and some of the staff still there, waiting to see if I would be released with some big joints. And I got the next day off. And then after that, right back to work.
So what got you involved in the writing about cannabis?
We started a newspaper called the Cannabis Digest. It was originally the Compassion Club's newsletter, but we figured we needed a platform to share our message, given that many of the news media outlets always fumbled it. They prefer to put a pun in the headline than a detail in the article. And so it wasn't serving us. So we made a blog, printed a newspaper, distributed it across Canada and internationally. Ended up in about 10,000. We print every 3 months. And we did about 42 editions of that. So we could make sure that our message was detailed and in the open. And therefore, if anybody was getting it wrong, we could simply slap a link down in the comment section, or really kind of help buffer, bolster the message, make it more accurate. Because we know it's a communications issue with cannabis. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and it takes a lot of effort to combat that. So yeah, Cannabis Digest.
That's why we need the internet censorship police, so that we can keep misinformation off the internet and make sure that only government approved content is released.
Well, maybe not exactly, but in Canada, the government puts out stuff about cannabis, and some of it's okay, but
we've seen some crazy stuff, but it's sort of a mix, isn't it?
It is.
Well, I totally agree, though, Owen. My background is the same as yours, which I'm going to say in one word is education. It appears to me that through your media work, you were saying you're backing up your work, okay, but that's education, and you're spreading it around the country. That's education, and that was obviously successful long term, and I found the same method, education, to be effective in the United States and elsewhere. You're right. Disinformation, misinformation. Some people just say shit because that's what they heard. It's not they're trying to be wrong. They just thought that that's how it was. Let me ask a basic question. When you were doing this, say when you started with your digest, what did you call the plant? What word did you use?
I meant cannabis.
You did?
Yeah, well, it was called the Cannabis Digest, the title. So
good. And what year was that?
I think it transformed into a newspaper in 2009 when the court case started. So yeah, we announced it with a press conference, and yeah.
I'm going to actually show everybody right there. This is the Supreme Court. This is an article within Cannabis Digest.
Probably one I wrote.
R.V. Smith.
Ted.
Yeah.
So Ted and I wrote lots of articles. I wrote over 150 articles about cannabis and about the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's skip to the trial. Tell us about this trial. You're sitting there in front of the Canadian Supreme Court. That's a big deal.
Yeah, well, we started in the BC Supreme Court 2012. We had 4 weeks to make our case to this to the judge alone. It was a voir dire, so a trial that occurs before the actual criminal aspect of the trial. So the trial was based on the constitutionality of the law, and so we could find the law unconstitutional before I actually went to trial. So that's what we tried to do. We brought in 4 patients from our Compassion Club with impactful stories. We brought in Dr. David Pate, who is a scientist who's been working on cannabis probably longer than most, and who appears in the citations for many of the studies that Health Canada references. So we had to go up against the police, and then we had to go up against the Chief Science Officer for Health Canada. He testified, and then we also had a food and drug expert talk about the regulations testified. So it was a battle of wizards. That's why I said that our wizard, Dr. Pate, he brought it. He was like a rainbow wizard. He was coming in like so much knowledge, so much information and compassion. Lovely, lovely man. Long white beard, ponytail. Just very, very informed and clear. Meanwhile, on the other side, they had sort of like this Ming the Merciless sort of wizard who didn't have any knowledge specifically of cannabis, but had reviewed a lot of reports and made this review of all of the studies. So he didn't have any specific experience with cannabis, but had read a bunch of books, read a bunch of studies, and put this thing together. So we essentially destroyed him and his credibility in the courtroom. And then we had our Matlock moment where Kirk Tusaw, who is my lawyer, was able to tease out from the government's chief science officer that his conclusions in his affidavit had actually been written by his boss at Health Canada and were not his own conclusions. In my book, Legalizing Cannabis Extracts, I put word for word that section of the case, so you can really see just how the castle wall crumbled on this man and his defense.
You show us your book again?
This is a pre-release copy. It's currently in pre-release mode. It's going to come out soon, before 4/20.
Gorgeous. The cover is gorgeous.
Yeah, it shows how, if you look in the cover, that mushrooms as well are an important part of this journey, and that mushrooms magic mushrooms were a guide for me, leading me toward helping people and helping them with cannabis and understanding the power of natural medicines. I had lots of wonderful experiences with mushrooms, and currently, I'm going to skip ahead to the present day, but I still work with Ted at this Compassion Club. And on the back side of the building, there is a clandestine mushroom club that has emerged, sort of emulating what we were doing back in the day, bringing mushrooms to the forefront with professional style products like chocolate bars and gummies and this sort of thing. So mushrooms and cannabis.
We had somebody on here recently who was a fan of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Cindy, her name was Cindy. I don't know. You might know her, Cindy Cindy Howell.
And Tony.
She said that she like flew on her mother's back and talked to little people and had conversations with the food that you give out. Does that make people have those things? Does that happen? And have you done that? Do you talk to the little people when you do?
I just like cannabis edibles sort of fit in that category too. I don't know how deep you guys have gone with them. I've gone deep, and you can have all sorts of experiences which are unusual with a high dose of cannabis edibles. Different than mushrooms, but still something that you should do in a controlled environment and consider your mind state. So those are the two important things to think about with these psychoactive experiences: is the set of your mind and the setting that you've placed yourself in. Fortunately, out here, we have some of the most beautiful settings you could imagine along the south coast of this island. Long paths through the woods with great big trees, and then beaches after beaches curled with the classic evergreens all dotted along the silhouette. It is totally gorgeous, and what a wonderful place if you're feeling good to go and eat some mushrooms or a cannabis cookie and enjoy the afternoon.
There's a history book called Set and Setting, very appropriate for this conversation. It was written by a friend of mine, now gone, named Norman Zinberg. He was a PhD psychiatrist. He was on the board of NORML when I ran it. And it's an excellent book. You should look it up, Owen. Set and Setting, Zinberg. Another coincidence, David Pate. I put together a cannabis book in 1997 called Cannabis in Medical Practice. And it's still in print. It's been amazing legs on the thing. But David Pate, along with another guy, Robert Clark, wrote two chapters actually in that book. One was about hemp, and the other was about how hemp and the earth connected. The hemp thing was very specific to the plant. But David was the co-author of those two chapters, and so I consider David in 1997 an expert. So he certainly had some years on him, and I knew him. His beard was not white, but he did have a ponytail.
Nice. Yeah, we're so grateful for him, and his input really has profoundly changed the Canadian legal cannabis landscape. He also had, I believe, testified in Watermelon's case. I might be wrong about that, but he's little known, but really a big character.
Oh, internationally, David is known by every cannabis researcher in the world. He's a star. Yeah.
Now, part of your court case, part of the challenge had to deal with the fact that the medical program in Canada, which, by the way, Owen was not a patient at this time. Owen was, he was a person who was helping, right? And at that time, cannabis was only allowed to be smoked. We weren't allowed all those alternatives.
Yeah, they had the rule that you could eat it, but you had to eat all of the plant material. And the reason for it the reason they didn't like any extraction, and probably the cleanest example is a cup of tea. So like you got a teapot, you got the leaf in with the tea in the water, that remains legal. But once you pour it through into the cup, now what's in the cup is illegal. The reason for that was that the government, they needed to know, that they needed to be able to, the police, to be able to weigh and measure your amount. So if you're a patient, you needed to stay within a specific limit. But if you mixed it with something, how are they going to measure and make sure that you were abiding by the rules? That was their argument. And the way we saw that was that they were precluding criminality into patients. So they're like patient criminals, and not giving people, that instead of the sense that we were making, which was that the active ingredients live on the outside of the plant. The plant itself, the fiber, the wood, have no medicinal benefit. They're not going for that in the first place. The government's referring to something which didn't really make fundamental sense. And that's why David Pate, he helped illustrate this. And we used some metaphors to help the judge understand. One of them was the golf ball on the tee. Something the judge might have had some familiarity with. The golf ball isn't supposed to stay on the tee. It just falls off. It's precarious. And that's the same with the trichome. The trichome head, it's like a little mushroom, little glass mushroom. And you give it a little shake, and all of a sudden, it's everywhere. Even the government cannabis that they would send out, the dry cannabis in the bags, would reach the home, and when they pulled the cannabis out, the bag itself would have trichomes lined on it. So were they breaking the law by mailing it out, or could they take it out of the package? None of this made sense, right? And so we started to break down the nonsense that was holding up this prohibition, which was not botanical, was not factually based on the reality of the plant.
Now what?
So you were talking therapeutic use, and they were talking criminal use. I mean, that's the debate here. They set up the system so that they could prove or disprove you're a criminal, and you're sitting there saying, "That's not the point. The point is this is medicine." Did you prevail?
Well, yes, we did. After the 4 weeks, we declared the law unconstitutional in British Columbia, and then triggered the next phase of the legal process here, which there's a 3-step process. We go British Columbia, then we go to appeal court, which has 3 judges, and then Supreme Court of Canada after that is 9 judges. So, but before we could go to the appeal court, we won the voir dire, but the judge said I still had to go to trial. I still had to see a jury and had to find out whether or not I personally should be punished. And so we arranged for that. 9 months later, we would go to court to set up a jury trial for me. And we figured we'd already won. We made sure we published about it as much as we could. We the jury pool, we could taint with education. We could make sure people knew the real story. We did. We sent newspapers all around, and then also we waived our publication ban so that other news outlets could come and report on our case. So we appeared in the news across the country. It was a very high profile, which was important for us. And for me, going into the jury trial, the day before the jury trial, the government contacts me to tell me that they're not going to call evidence. They don't believe they're going to win. And so I was released at that point. But they let me wait for 9 months.
Sure.
Just for fun, right? Just to get my nerves up or something.
Were you facing jail time? Did you get yourself involved in something that maybe you shouldn't have got yourself involved in had you listened to the right people and stayed away from that devil weed?
They wanted 4 months in jail. They sent me there's this paperwork which requested that, but then in the back of the paperwork it had a criminal record, and the criminal record included armed robbery, breaking and entering, all this stuff that I had no idea about. And so I look, and they actually had a different person tagged onto my file with a different middle name.
Okay.
So after that, they were a little bit dumb. They didn't come back with a new recommendation for jail. It was a bit of a fumble, essentially. So it was not clear if I was going to get any punishment. And essentially, I got released at the jury trial level before we went to the appeal court. And at the Court of Appeal, we won that. That was in Vancouver 2 years later. And we won 2-1. So the two female judges agreed with us. The one male judge did not. And he thought that I didn't have a right to stand up for medical patients because I'm not a medical patient.
Right.
The issue is called standing. I don't have the standing to raise the argument, is what he said.
We have the same here. We have the same problem here. Yeah.
Now you talked about how you had to deal with the fact that people could only smoke their cannabis. When it came to the Supreme Court challenge, I was one of the many people that were in the courtroom that day during those times. There was other people that were involved. You had interveners as well that got involved in the case, and that included parents of children who had to consume cannabis, and the federal government was basically telling them that their parents, by making coconut oil, they were breaking the law.
That's right.
Coconut oil.
That's right. Mandy McKnight and her son Liam, as well as a number of other parents across the country, had been contacting me, excited about what we were doing because their situation is so dire. That kid's not gonna live to adulthood. He's gonna seize a lot and die. Really, the worst thing you can imagine, I think. And they were so happy that there was someone fighting for them. And Mandy is a wonderful public speaker, and she volunteered to go on national news. She was on like Power and Politics, which is one of our biggest high-profile interview segments on CBC, on our national broadcaster. And she's just a lovely woman, and her son, beautiful boy with Dravet's, which is a serious epileptic condition. And she was using that coconut oil with a little bit of cannabis in it to help reduce those. She was working with a compassion club out east called Sante Cannabis, and they submitted her story to the Supreme Court of Canada. So the way that works is that any other cases that could be tagged on to what I was doing in the Supreme Court, they would get all combined into one thing. So we had submissions from the BC Civil Liberties, from the HIV/AIDS Society, from like a number of like very high profile, like the Ontario Bar. Like we had the legal organization coming to argue on our behalf against the standing argument the government had. So in Supreme Court, we had about 12 lawyers. Most of them were volunteers.
Nice.
They'd come all but for themselves. And on the other side, there was one guy. And he was sort of shrinking as the court case went on. The room was filled with medical patients. There were people eating edibles, vaping in the room. It was hard to keep everyone from cheering anytime the court said something. Like, it's not a sports arena, you guys. But there was 2 overflow rooms in the building. Also, they had set up screens so that the people could watch the live event. There was a bus called the Extract Express that picked up medical patients around Ontario. Had dab rigs.
On that bus.
You were on that.
I was on that bus. Keep going. Keep going.
We met them in Ottawa, and we had a party at the local Legion. I think was the only time that there's been vaping in that building.
Yeah.
Then we had such a spectacle. It was wonderful. At the end, I was going to like the national media, doing a lot of radio, that sort of thing, and people got on the news talking about the issue. It was very high profile.
I can tell you, when the case was done and it was handed over to the courts to look at it, and they left that room blew up in a roar of celebration because they knew that the case had to win. It was just so strong, and it was like winning a championship game. It was great. It was overwhelming. Really, it was good.
One of the coolest parts was when the judges, the Supreme Court judges themselves, just shut the government down. They're great. Have it recorded online. They're great. Just stop there. I know you've got a lot to say, but try to say things that are, meaningful. That sort of stuff. It's like you're talking, but another one was like, I know you're trying to say a lot of things, but I'm just not following this argument at all. That's what the Supreme Court justice said to the government lawyer. And that argument, this was like their last straw. Like, cannabis plant is like a cow. Cannabis plant is like a cow. And these guys want to get raw milk out of this cow. And raw milk is illegal. We know raw milk is bad for you. We have laws to prevent people from giving out raw milk. This is the government. And the judge is like, what are you talking about? I'm not following this at all. You mean we're talking about cannabis and you're talking about cows? It's just,
oh, nice move, lawyer.
one of the sort of takeaways is just how indefensible prohibition is. There's just, if you challenge it with real science and real arguments, it doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go here pretty soon, but let me go back to something, Owen. Just for the audience's sake, on the edibles. Down here in the United States, anyway, we have a big problem with edibles, and again, it's lack of education. Because the edible takes a while to kick in, could be up 45 minutes or an hour. A lot of people down here, they take what would be a reasonable dose, say a gummy or half a gummy to get going. Doesn't work. Then they take another one. Then they might take a third one, and then it starts kicking in. And now for somebody like you and I and the other guys here, we can understand what's going on. We've been there. We've done this, and again in a controlled setting, it's not a problem. But for the inexperienced, it becomes a friggin' nightmare. And that's on an individual level. And then our government takes these individual nightmares and says, see, this stuff we've been telling you, it's poison. So I just want to point out to people here what Owen's talking about earlier about his edible experience is good for him and for experienced users. But if you're new to this, you really want to do two things. You want to go low and go slow. Just keep that in mind. Take a low dose and be patient. Yeah. Owen, before you take off, let's brag up some stuff here. Let's have the book again.
What are you doing now?
Yeah, now and the book, and what do you got going next week and all of that?
I mean, are you retired? Are you going into a nursing home, or are you writing your memoirs? What's up?
Well, this book is coming out soon. I'll be releasing it before 420 and combining it with a podcast. So,
oh, nice.
Like what you guys are doing, I'm doing a similar thing. I've got a local movie producer who's helping me with it. And we had our first episode recently with Ted Smith. And I've got some lawyers lined up to really dive into it. It's going to be called The Legalizers. So it's really focusing on those who are making an effort to legalize cannabis in some way or another, or change the law. Since legalization up here, we have sort of a legal market, which is very impotent in its advocacy. It can't challenge Health Canada without getting spanked. And they're all competing with the government. It's kind of ugly the way it's been set up. up here. And so it's important, I think, to get the message, to continue to get the message out that there's a lot still to be done. We currently, I'm breaking the law every day I go to work. We're on the front line of it at a medical cannabis shop. In Canada, you're not allowed to have medical cannabis shops. You can only have recreational cannabis shops. And so we also have a consumption lounge. You're not allowed to have those, but we work on getting that happening for us. We're also selling edibles, which are above the limit, the legal limit that was established. And that is an arbitrary limit that has no basis in science and was simply the government's response to my ruling. To say, okay, you can have edibles, but they got to be really, really weak. You got to eat a whole bunch of them. Ha ha ha. You know, a new arbitrary limit has been placed between people and their medicine. And so we are bypassing that, providing high dose edibles for people with very serious conditions. And of course, we introduce everybody to edibles in a very careful way so that they can make sure they manage it properly and we don't have unwanted side effects and that sort of thing, which is a very real thing with edibles. Yeah, so breaking the law, wrote a book, doing a podcast, and yeah, we're going to keep rolling with the punches.
It sounds like by accident, you just grew into the career of medical cannabis activist by accident.
Yeah, I was sort of planted here at just the right time to grow into this, it seems.
Well, we got the right guy at the right time. Fate came along and worked out well. Your experience that you've told us all here was rather remarkable. Your success is to be congratulated. And what's your future of going after legalization? You know, don't feel like the Lone Ranger. We're still looking at that down here, but you're dealing with, you know, up there, down here. You're dealing with lawyers and cops, and they don't understand medical. They don't understand recreation. They don't want to understand. And of course, I lecture everybody every time I get a chance. Part of the problem, probably in Canada, is they don't even think of this as a plant. You know, everything is you've described as being having a number, you know, to the dose or the percentage, and it's a plant. They can't get over that. Good luck.
I believe truly that people growing their own and making their own cannabis, which is something that we legalize, people can make whatever they want in their homes. That is so important. And issue education to help people take care of themselves is something that I want to focus on in the future.
And according to the article that I had shown earlier, this is the 10th anniversary of that court date.
Wow.
It says March.
Can you imagine that much time's gone by and look
March
at all the changes
on the article. And here we are, 10 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the changes that lawsuit and that court case made by just looking around at the progress that's happened up in Canada.
Yeah, but those kinds of lawsuits, again, for the international community, that's very impressive.
And
other countries look at that and they go, "Hey, wait a minute! Canada is making a move here." You know, we've seen Uruguay, Spain, etc. So, again, your success in Canada had international repercussion too. It just had to.
We're a Commonwealth country too, and our Constitution is great Constitution. It's been emulated across the world, and so there's possibilities that these arguments could be applied in other countries. So yeah, that's why I kind of want to get the book out there and be very detailed. It's very detailed. I went through the transcripts with a comb and got all of the facts in there, all of the government's arguments, so you can really prepare for that if you're in Australia or maybe some other country that is looking at high dose edibles for serious conditions.
Yeah. I guess being it's not going to be released for another month or two, You got any ideas where you're going to be able to, people will be able to get it?
I'm a website for it right now, legalizingcannabis.card with 2 R's. If you check that out, you can find the pre-sales. You could order a pre-sale if you wanted. But I will be doing a bit more publication. I'll be contacting some influencers, try to get it out there through the digital means.
All right, good stuff. Good
Done.
stuff.
Is the 2 R's the English spelling?
All right.
Well, thank you again, Owen. We took a little break there. The people probably won't know that, but we took a little break, and the 3 of us sat here and went, "Damn, that was pretty interesting." So, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, exactly. We appreciate you coming on, and you know, it's nice to remember going back over those whole times, and the people who are new to the cannabis community, you know, may not have heard the story or just maybe heard it faintly. So it's always nice to be able to have somebody come back to the program who's gone through those things in order to help let people know the history and the advocacy that's been to get us to the point where we are today. Because obviously your case will have an effect on what we have today for legalization.
And again, you work with some of the pioneers like Michelle Rainey. We should give her a shout out. You want to say anything about Michelle before we go?
Well, I unfortunately didn't get much time with Michelle. I did get a nice big hug. She used to give these beautiful big hugs. Yeah, but she was a legend, largely like in the Vancouver scene, but also across the country. One of the BC3 that had so much attention brought to them from the DEA. Yeah, a real hero, standing up to some serious opposition. Yeah.
And
blessed.
Al Graham, I know that you also were a champion of Michelle Rainey, and you were a very good friend of hers as well.
Yeah, I met Michelle through Treating Yourself magazine. I mentioned earlier about the story of the first time I had met her. Over my left shoulder right here is a caricature picture of Michelle Rainey that was on the front cover of Treating Yourself magazine. And it was presented to me when I received an award, Michelle Rainey Award for my advocacy work through Treating Yourself magazine.
And she lives in our hearts, and she lives at Time for Hemp as well. People can find information and meet Michelle Rainey at the timeforhemp.news website. Al, Byrne, I'm thinking you had a chance to meet Michelle once or twice, didn't you?
No.
All right. Well, I guess not. Well, is there anything you want to say before we say goodbye? So long, farewell. You're on mute.
He's muted, yeah.
You're on mute.
Yeah, that's amateur stuff. But hey, I'm old, you know.
All right.
But yeah, I did.
Let me ask that again, and I'll just make it a clean edit. And Al, is there anything you want to say before we say so long, farewell, bye-bye?
Yes, I want to thank again Owen Smith. You're a smart guy. You got balls. You did good. You left something behind, even if you'd have died tomorrow. So congratulations.
Thanks, Al.
And I want to remind people out there that it is important to share our broadcast so everybody around the world can understand the importance of medical cannabis and the wonderful things that this fantastic hemp plant can do. Please, again, subscribe and hit the like button if you get a chance, and let your friends know about our broadcast. That's how we get found. Go visit the timeforhemp.news website and check out our archives. There's a lot of amazing voices in there from yesteryear that still have a lot of things to say to the people who are working on the front lines today. And with that said, make everybody understand how important this plan is and how we need to come together to take time for hemp.
Time for Hemp is a Pace Radio Network content provider.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.